Okay, we getting into that right now?
We're going to get into it. So I for all the listeners and viewers out there, we're getting into an educational piece. Obviously, March Madness around the corner, so we want to talk about filling out brackets. Now, some of this stuff that we're going to go over, if you're an experienced bettor or someone who knows a lot of game theory, some of this stuff may not be for you because we want to appeal to the casual bettor, someone who might be filling out a bracket for the first time, is in an office pool or whatever. But also we're going to go through some more advanced concepts as well throughout this. And Ed is a perfect guy. Like I said, I have read this book, which is actually a very quick, short read, but is filled with information. I would highly suggest it for anyone who wants a copy of it that they can refer to over the course of the years. But let's just start with a lot of people get discouraged, so to speak, about filling out a bracket because they don't follow the sport or they don't have some sort of sophisticated model, number of variety of reasons. Is it still possible for them to gain an edge over other people in their bracket, even though they know nothing about the sport?
Absolutely. I think if you just use analytics, like if you just go to my site, or whatever. I mean, let's not plug my stuff, right?
You can. You can
538.
This is your time, Ed. It's your time to shine. You can plug whatever you want.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you just go, just any reputable source of analytics, or whatever, let's just use mine because I actually have some solid numbers on it. Like your odds of beating someone, and you just put the higher ranked team in every game. Your odds of beating any one person from kind of ESPN's bracket, I estimate to be like 75-80%.
Pretty high.
So there's an edge there, right? Like, I mean, we're always as bettors looking for, kind of square money. And there's no better example of that than March Madness tournaments. Now, if you get into a March Madness pool with Alan Boston and Mike Craig and other guys who bet on college basketball for a living, then that's not such a great idea, even if you're in a small pool. And that's one of the things we'll talk about. You got to know who's in your pool, right? Like you want to get into the dumbest, squarest pool that you possibly can of like 10 people. That's kind of ideal, like those family members that are just like, oh, hey, this is fun. And even if you don't know anything, like just go straight with the numbers. Your bracket's going to look really boring. It's going to be a lot of higher seeds in there, but you're going to give yourself a pretty good chance to win. So I do think there's a lot. It's a plus EV proposition to get into these pools.
Now, when you actually have the bracket itself, a lot of people still print it out and fill it out. Some do it digitally now. As
who's still printing these out?
I personally still print them.
You write them in pen, all your teams?
I like to put the bracket up on the wall, and after every game, I go with a yellow highlighter or a pink highlighter.
You write it in like a dry erase marker?
No, once I fill it out, it's stuck. It's permanent.
So here's what I'm saying. How could you possibly fill it out, though, with a pen? When I'm filling in a bracket, the amount of erases or the amount of swaps I end up doing is probably like upwards of 20 to 30. Because I finish it, I'm like, no, that's going to be too much chalk. And then you go back, adjust some more dogs, like how do you...
Let's just say I waste a lot of paper.
Fair enough.
Let's just say I waste a lot of paper. But ultimately, I think different people have different strategies. I'm curious on yours. I've heard all sorts of things. Some people start with a champion, and then they kind of work their way backwards from there. Other people start with the initial rounds, and they kind of work their way towards a champion. Do you have one recommendation over another? And if not, what's your own personal preference for doing the bracket?
I think you should always work from champion just because that choice is the most important in terms of points. It's usually worth 32 points, whereas around a 64 is only worth 1 point. So I think work from champion, and that's what I do on my site. That's what I do for members and people who buy my bracket advice. Like I focus on the 8 teams that have a legit chance of winning this tournament, and I try to break it down, and I try to give them basically every little thing that every little edge that you can have in kind of evaluating these teams. For example, like I'm not high on Purdue. I think they shot the lights out earlier in the season. They have a great player in Jaden Ivey, but I'm not high on the rest of the team. They don't play any defense, and they are first when I look at my adjusted points per possession. But there's no way you can convince me they're a better offense than Gonzaga. They're just not.
Are you looking at the betting odds?
There.
Are you looking at the betting odds at all when you're doing this stage of the brackets, like the top 8 teams? Like, are you just like taking a look at who are the favorites, or is this more like ground up, your own analysis? I only think these teams could win.
So I certainly consider the betting markets in that all that's baked into my model.
Fair enough.
That I use for all of this. So that's all in there. I don't necessarily just take NCAA tournament futures and put it in there. I think, I mean, this is going to sound a little pretentious, but I think the models can actually do better there. Like I don't understand why the book should have such a huge vig on those things. Like if you have a good college basketball model, you should be able to nail these win probabilities after Selection Sunday pretty easily. But yeah, I mean, honestly, Johnny, market data in all sports is kind of one of my tricks that I try not to talk about too much, but it's all in there. Using past market data is a very powerful way of projecting forward.
When picking a champion, how much did the other people in the pool play a factor for you? Like I'll give an example, but say you're on the UCLA campus and you're filling out a bracket. Very unlikely that other people are going to pick Arizona to win. Or, you're going to get a lot of UCLAs to win the tournament. Like how much of that factors into, like, potentially, let's say I'm just throwing out a hypothetical here, but you're down on Arizona. You don't really think that they're deserving of a number 1 seed or whatever, just throwing something out there. But the vast majority of your pool is going to pick Arizona to exit early. Would you then consider changing your strategy, going against your own personal beliefs to throw Arizona in as a national champion because you would be going contrarian in that state?
Yeah, I absolutely would. I mean, maybe you throw up, but sometimes you do that when you're betting on things, right?
Right.
Okay. So you mentioned first.
Yeah, like knowing who's in your pool is a really critical thing. And Rob, that's kind of the perfect example, right? If you are local in Los Angeles and everyone's high on UCLA because they made that magical run last year, then yes, you should fade them. You should fade them and pick someone else. Arizona is a good example. Gonzaga is an interesting example. They're going to be the favorite by almost any respectable metric that you can find. But, for that, like I would suggest Arizona and Gonzaga would be my top 2 favorites. But if you're in LA, you're a little bit more likely to have someone pick a Gonzaga or an Arizona just because you're on the West Coast.
Right.
So maybe pick the best team, east of the Mississippi River, which this year might be a Kentucky, might be a Baylor. So, yeah, but that's absolutely the right thinking, right? You want to fade what other people are doing. I live here in Ann Arbor. Last year, a lot of people picked Michigan to win because Michigan was pretty good. But they weren't the best team in the country. So there was a lot of value in fading them.
Okay. So you got to know who's in your pool. So awesome. It's very similar to like reading a sports book's rules or reading your pool's rules before you make a decision, right? So you got to know who's in. Fade if there's going to be a specific pick. If you're in an NHL playoff pool and you're in Montreal, don't take the Habs. Don't take the Canadians. We got it. So that's step number 1, most important. Okay. From there, you mentioned you like to narrow down the top 8. And then these are the teams that potentially can win the tournament. I'm going to pick one of these as my winners. From there, what's next in the process?
Yeah, I mean, picking from there, it's pretty easy, right? Because you just pick you pick the better team in all the other games. So I actually provide that service both for members of my site, which will be my best numbers. And then if you sign up for my free email newsletter, I'll give you that cheat sheet for based on my public numbers, which are margin of victory adjusted for strength of schedule. I try to make that pretty easy because, in particular, you don't want to spend too much time trying to figure out the 12 over the 5. It used to be a thing where, you just write all these articles about which 12 is going to be a 5 because there was a little small sample size of years where there were a lot of upsets there. Now, if you kind of look at if you look at a large enough data set, like 12 seeds are slightly less likely to win that first game than 11 seeds, or slightly less, and they're slightly more likely that than the 13 seed, right? It's very linear. There's nothing special about that 12 when you look at a big enough data set. So don't, and again, the stuff I was telling you about predicting upsets as well, like that stuff's hard. just pick the chalk. You're going to be fine. And it's really similar to, you know, how like, you know, Rufus always tweets on the Super Bowl, like, I'm hoping for the most boring Super Bowl ever.
Yeah.
Like I want to be asleep at halftime kind of idea. It's kind of the same thing with pools. Like, you want a boring tournament. It's not like you're not going to win if things go crazy in the first couple of rounds, because things do go crazy, right? But the more boring it is, the better it is for kind of your optimal strategy. Both like kind of the favorites where you're in a small pool and you want to pick a, you know, the higher ranked team, you know, a lot of chalk, versus you know, the contrarian thing where you are trying to fade other people. In both cases, you want the optimal strategy. You're rooting for kind of a boring tournament. And I think there's a lot of parallels there.
So if you're in a bigger pool, you know, it's like, let's say like 20,000 people,
Even go more than that.
100,000 people,
yeah.
Massive pool hosted on some site. How does this change everything, or does it?
Yeah, I mean, I personally wouldn't join that pool because, you know, if you're in a 100,000 person pool, you know, my methods can probably get you to win about once every 5,000 years.
Yeah.
So let's say it's a free. Let's say it's a free. Contest.
It's the Warren Buffett. Well,
Yeah,
let's
yeah,
not
yeah.
even say it's a Warren Buffett like perfect bracket thing. Let's just say it's $1 million.
Say winner wins a trip to the Super Bowl,
Right.
free
Yeah.
entry, some brand sponsors it, and whatever.
We're
So,
basically
like,
forcing you to join the pool, Ed.
Yeah,
And we
gotcha.
want to know what your strategy it would be in that larger pool.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're certainly not picking all favorites there, right? I mean, you're going to go with upsets. You're going to talk to people who know 358 college basketball teams and which ones are more likely to win than not. Yeah, I did some stuff on the odds of a perfect bracket.
It ain't happening.
It's so small. It's so small that I think if I remember right, the cost to insure it was like $2,000.
Yeah.
For $1 billion, yeah,
$1 billion.
that probably sounds about right. Because if I follow it every year, there's like an ESPN tracker that tracks how many of the ESPN brackets across all pools are perfect through just the first 2 days. And it's usually like between like 0 and 10. So that would be between the first 2 days, right? Then you just get into Saturday, Sunday, and then it's done.
I believe, I could be speaking out of my ass here, but I'm pretty sure that you are more likely to get struck by lightning 7 times in your life than you are to fill out a perfect bracket, to give people some perspective.
Sounds right.
But what if you're trying to get struck by lightning?
Well, then it's a different story. I'm talking about like not going out with an umbrella and, you know, a steel rod in the air or anything like that. Just like the statistically speaking, over time, you're more likely.
What's more likely? You shoot a round of golf in the 60s?
Please stop now.
Or I fill out a perfect bracket. Okay, Ed. Okay, awesome. So basically, to sum that up real quick, what we're saying is like, if you are in a bigger pool, and I think actually I'll ask Ed this one, like, what constitutes a pool size where you would want to stay with like kind of the chalk strategy versus actually trying to expand it? Like, how many is too many? If your pool's 10 people, no doubt you want to make sure you're like chalk. Pick one of the top 8 teams to win the pool. Don't go crazy with like a 7 seed winning it, stuff like that. But if you're in a pool, let's say like 100 people or 150, it's just like an office pool, at some job you work. Does that change like in terms of like the 10-person pool, 150, and then obviously 100,000? Where would you put that 100 to 150 sweet spot?
Yeah. Where the favorite strategy has a lower win probability than like kind of a contrarian fading strategy. It's usually somewhere between 20 and 50. Maybe, man, I guess I've seen some examples where it gets to 100. But yeah, somewhere between there. I mean, so basically, you know, all these are estimates based on data from ESPN, and it kind of matters the fraction of people that you're assuming pick the favorite. You know, so you know, if you think back to I've been using 2019 as an example, when Duke was a big favorite. You know, my numbers had them about 34% chance to win the NCAA tournament, which is very, very high for the favorite. But let's see. So it was like, you know, let's say like 40% of ESPN brackets picked Duke. The higher that is, like, let's assume like 50%, let's assume like 50% chose Duke. Just for example,
Okay.
The bigger that gap between the 50% of people and then their true odds of winning, at 34%, the smaller that crossover point becomes, right? So, right. So basically, like, the worse that other people are picking, the smaller the pool that you can potentially start using the contrarian strategy.
Makes sense.
Fair enough. Okay. Last question on this, I guess, and then we can start to get into our closing question here. But we wanted to get like you to give out a piece of advice you haven't given out before. So definitely anyone listening, check out Ed's shows. He mentioned before, we'll plug him again at the end. But what's one piece of advice specifically for college basketball, March Madness, specifically for March Madness that's like, it's not out there. Give us a piece of advice that, or give us something that's like super overrated and you're like, never follow this. Both will be just as valuable.
Right. So, I already talked about some, like, don't focus on 12/5s. Like, that's like literally the worst waste of time that you can possibly get. And Johnny, I actually already gave you one, right? Like the whole, like, the lack of predictability of upsets is something that's going to appear on my podcast the day after this. It's like predicting earthquakes, man. It's hard. So I just wouldn't spend too much time on that. I would spend time with looking at what the market says, looking at what my model says, looking at what any other trusted authority says. It's hard to predict upsets, and I wouldn't try. I mean, you can try if you want to have some fun with it. And then, like, I guess my last piece of advice, I would just really be cautious about the stuff you read out there. So, and it doesn't take too much intelligence to figure this out. But I was looking for other articles about how to predict upsets in the tournament. And there was an entire article on the NCAA.com that took the 9 times that a 15 had beat a 2 as their sample set for what constitutes an upset. And obviously 9 games is no kind of sample size at all for upsets. So yeah, there's a lot of trash out there. I kind of want to do a podcast episode of just like worst advice on tournament and filling out your pool. I think that would be a lot of fun. It probably wouldn't be that useful for people, but there's a lot of garbage out there. I mean, that's kind of the reason I wrote the book. I was looking for a lot out there for a lot of advice. And, I first kind of got wind of the contrarian advice because there was a good article out there on Yahoo, maybe like 2008 or something, about how you fade other people. But then I started looking more for, like, this is what, maybe 2012, 2013, before I wrote the book. There's just a lot of garbage out there. So, stick with people that you trust. Like, the people at 538 know what they're talking about. I know what I'm talking about. So, I mean, there you go.
I'd love to join you for that podcast of things not to do. That's like kind of my specialty.
Pull open articles and stuff.
Yeah, we kind of have it with tweets that trigger us on this as well, where we kind of turn into educational. Right. But yeah, there are certain things, I think especially the ones that trigger me the most around March Madness are the articles of, like, always pick a 12 seed to advance in the first round. And it's like, okay, now what if all the 12 seeds are 20-point underdogs in their games? Are you going to pick one just to have one advance because it's happened in these previous years, right? And then, like, make sure that you have, I'm just throwing out random stuff here, make sure you have at least 113 seed in the Sweet 16. It's like, why? Like, if they're all 15-point underdogs in the first round, why am I going to pick them to advance? And I think a lot of people just fall into, like, the dumb, this has happened in the past, therefore it's a indicator of the future. But I mean, we know the way that the committee ranks these teams as well, right? Lots of times you get some really bogus, crazy stuff out there, where it would not be uncommon to see, an 11 seed favored over a 6.
Right. How about this one? This isn't even pre-bracket, but after the first round, you always see these, like, news outlets that potentially claim to be, like, gambling news outlets or just regular news outlets saying, like, what an upset, like 10 seed pulls off the upset, huge upset. And it's like, bro, there's minus 175 favorite. Yeah, exactly. Like, just looking at the seed numbers, that would be a fun one.
And this is, like, obvious advice for people listening to this show, but if you're filling out a bracket, like, just look at who's favored in the markets, right, for those first round games. Like, you can get Sweet 16 odds on anything, right?
And I would even apply that to future rounds. Personally, a lot of people,
right,
like, you know, if you are going to pick an underdog to make a run in the tournament, as an example, and you want to be contrarian, differentiate yourself, have a 13, 14 seed going far, I'd probably look at the ones that are the smallest underdogs in their games if I'm going to have them advance multiple rounds, right? I'm not going to take the 20-point underdog in round one to advance multiple rounds. So I think that plays into it as well. And the last thing we haven't touched on yet, which I just think is important to touch on for anyone that's listening, is you have to know the rules of your pool, right? There are different scoring systems sometimes for March Madness, some that incentivize you to pick an underdog. So if an underdog or a lower rated seed wins their game, you get extra bonus points. In that case, you're definitely going to want to look at the market numbers because, like we said, sometimes lower seeds are actually favored in the game, and you're almost always going to want to pick that team, regardless of whether or not you think they're going to lose, because there's just such incentive for you to do so.
Yeah, there's also pools where, like, I was once in a pool where, like, if the 16 seed wins, then that's 16 points. If the 1 seed wins, it's only 1 point. At that point, like, when I was running through that, it was better to just take every single dog, right? I mixed in some around the middle seeds, but if that's the case, then you have to look at the max amount of points that 1 seed can even get, right? It's just like 1, 1, 1, 1. So as Rob mentioned, always read your rules. We should have mentioned that off the rip. So read your rules and then know who is in the pool with you.
Yes. Ed, we will wrap up with our closing question, which we asked to every single guest on the podcast, which you've probably heard at some point or another. But if you could go back 5 years and talk to a previous version of yourself, what piece of advice would you give to your old self?
I would say that you need to spend more time trying to help others. And I know that seems kind of trite, but like, maybe let me give you an example, like of my life in my work, right? Like my work has always kind of been football, and, you know, like after March Madness ends, like, I don't know, in past years, I would just not, you know, maybe do some NBA stuff, maybe like, I'm saying this really badly, but now the more I think about, the more I've changed over the last couple of years is focusing on like, how can I help members of my site and people who follow me, right? And that is knowing more about football and doing better football calculations than anyone else out there. And the month of April and May is the time to do that. And I think I get a little bit better at that every year. I hope to continue to get better at that every year. But I think if you can help other people, whether it's, you know, the people that are members of my site or, you know, your betting partners, like if you just kind of focus on helping and how you make yourself helpful in the most useful way, like everything else kind of takes care of itself in terms of money, in terms of kind of satisfaction. And you can even apply this to, like, obviously, like your life as well, right? You can get the most benefit out of your marriage if you focus on helping your spouse. Yep. You can get the most out of your family and your life if you kind of focus on helping your kids. Even if that means, like, you know, the drudgery of spending an hour on a Saturday, like filling out some form for like the soccer team. And I think that, you know, I think a lot of times in life, we get caught up in the rat race and where we're going and this and that and the other thing. I know I certainly do. I think the thing that's kind of helped me the most is just making it really simple, like waking up and saying, well, how can I most help members of my site and working on my business? How can I most help, like, my wife in her, you know, her job and her career and stuff like that. And I think if you just kind of focus on that, everything else kind of takes care of itself. And, like, you know, that doesn't mean like you have to work 52 weeks out of the year on your business or whatnot. Like you should take some time away. You should take a week to, you know, think big and how you want to proceed in the future. That doesn't mean you don't take vacations or whatnot, but, you know, when you are focused on work or the meaningful things, you know, if you think about how you can sweat for others a little bit, I think a lot of everything else takes care of itself.
Ed, I'm not going to lie to you. It was a rough start to the answer, for sure.
It was really well said. One of the best.
That was our best answer I think we've ever received, right? Thank you for that advice. I think that's amazing. You know, just making yourself more valuable to others around you. You know, I didn't even I'm just still spinning in my mind. Thank you very much, Ed. That was an amazing answer. And thank you for coming on to the podcast and being with us here today. Before we close off, if you just want to plug your stuff one more time. So you've got that podcast coming out on Friday. Listeners can find it is it the Football Analytics Show where that will be? Or
Yeah.
Is it, yeah. Okay. So you go ahead.
It's very confusing.
It's very confusing this time of year because my podcast is the Football Analytics Show. But right now during March, it's the Bracket Wisdom series. So it's a daily podcast of about 10 minutes every day. It started Monday, March 7th, and it'll go every weekday until the start of the tournament next Thursday. But it really is about football and football analytics because that is the bulk of my business and that's the bulk of what I'm going to do. And basically, as soon as the tournament starts, my next guest is I don't know who it's going to be, but someone to talk about what the heck is going on with Russell Wilson and
nice.
And Aaron Rodgers and all that stuff. So my podcast is the Football Analytics Show, and then my site is thepowerrank.com. I think the best way to interact there is to sign up for my email newsletter. So it's my sports betting email newsletter, and I try to make it three things: valuable, concise, and entertaining. And during football season, it's mostly about football. But I'm trying to do some golf in the off season. Started doing that last year, and it was pretty good.
Nice.
And so the newsletter is the best way to go, simply because like this time of year, like I'm so busy that like I'll send out a newsletter and forget to post it on the site. And so if you're on the newsletter, you get all my best stuff. And you can always just reply if you have a question. Just reply to the email newsletter and I'll get back to you about whatever.
Very cool.
So that you can get that at thepowerrank.com.
If you could go back and talk to a previous version of yourself, would you change the name of your podcast to make it less confusing?
No.
Probably gets a lot of good SEO value.
That's what I was saying. It is a good name for rank, like traffic.
Yeah.
It's like you got all the things covered. Football analytics.
Nobody is searching CirclesOff ever, but people are definitely searching football analytics. So he's way up on us right now.
Yeah, no, actually, Rob, I would say no, because I chose that at a point in my in the evolution of my business where I knew like it wasn't like my business is not ranking sports teams.
Right.
My business is to help football bettors with better calculations. And I realized that right when I started the podcast. And that's why I called it the Football Analytics Show. Maybe I should change it to the Football Analytics and Betting Show, because that's really what it is. But I think that title reminds me like this is what we do, right? And you need to get back to talking about football. And, and that's a mistake I made. I feel like, I haven't been good about getting episodes up in the off season. I think it's fine to do some episodes that are not necessarily all football in April and May, but people care about it all year round. And the title kind of helps me focus on what I should be doing on that podcast.
Perfect.
Okay.
I will plug the book one more time as well. How to Win Your NCAA Tournament. By Ed Feng.
Rob's really holding up a pockets Bible size.
It would honestly would fit in my back pocket. It's a very quick read, but it's actually like there's a lot of detailed examples in here, which I like about it. There are visuals. It's really good. Honestly, I'd highly recommend it for anyone who's just like, if you want to have it on hand, you can refer to it every single year. I think it's really good stuff. So you can check that out on Amazon or Kindle as well. Yep. Appreciate your time. Go ahead, Ed.
Just like if you're on Kindle Unlimited, you can get the book at no additional cost.
Beautiful.
And just download it on your Kindle. And if you are really fluent in analytics and you trust me that your odds of winning a pool decrease exponentially with pool size, you can just skip the first two chapters and go straight to chapter 3. Know exactly what to do for your pool.
Okay, Dr. Ed Feng, everyone. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We will see you all next week. Rate, review, 5 stars.